Imagine a lovely household brownie, bright-eyed, easy smile, sweet-natured. Now imagine the opposite, ugly, malicious and evil. What you've got there is a goblin. It seems a bit harsh though, doesn't it? Are they really that bad? Well, yes, and heaps worse as it happens. G'day, I'm Kitty. Welcome to Fairy Encounters. I can't dress it up for you. Goblins are grotesque. They vary in their appearance, but they've been described as resembling trolls, gargoyles, or even orcs. They are, at best, on a good day, just very annoying and bloody creepy, but at their worst, they can be demonic-like and utterly terrifying. Goblins are unique in that, unlike most other fae, they're fairly unbothered if we see them. They'll pop up in all sorts of places and then disappear in front of our very eyes. They have no care for our personal space or privacy. In fact, it's alarming just how many encounters I've read that take place in bathrooms, and I share a few of them in this video. So settle in. I've got 16 true sightings or encounters with goblin creatures, and I reckon you'll find them just as surprising and creepy as I did. I grew up in an old house in the south, kinda out in the middle of nowhere. The house was laid out somewhat circular, as you could walk from the living room through most other rooms just by walking in a complete circle and end up back where you started. When I was about 5, me and my younger sister were chasing each other around the house in circles while my mum cooked dinner. I was in front of her and we were laughing and carrying on. When we got into the dining room, in the inside corner, there was a small, greenish creature with a dark cloak on. It had pointy ears that stuck out and sharp teeth. So I'd say it was maybe 2 foot in height. It looked kind of like it had been at the bottom of a pond or something, very old and tattered. It put its finger to its lips and was grinning. This thing didn't look like a little man or a gnome or anything like that. It was more akin to a gremlin type, with no hair on it that I could see, and green skin. I slammed to a stop, and my sister was chasing so close behind that she ran right into me, which pushed us both around the corner into the kitchen. We both started screaming, and my mum ran to us to see what was the matter, but the thing was gone. This has haunted me for years. I'm 25 years old now, and although I've done tons of searching, I've never found anything that really fits what we saw. For a long time I thought maybe I'd imagined it, and if it weren't for my sister also seeing it, or my mum remembering our very real terror, I probably would have just written it off. There were a lot of weird things happening in that house when I was young. Disembodied voices, things moving, and super weird dreams. But that was obviously the weirdest and the most unsettling. We still talk about it from time to time to this day, and it always makes us feel kind of yuck. I actually just spoke with my sister about this again, just to ask her for some specifics. She remembers it looking exactly as I do. The only thing that we differ on is the smile. I vividly remember it making eye contact with me, putting its finger to its mouth, like shh, and then it's smiling. I'm not sure if that's because I was in front of my sister and got a better look or what. She remembers it as more of a blur out of the corner of her eye before she ran into me, while I remember turning my head and looking right at it. It happened so fast. I only wish I could replay my memory. When I was in my early 20s, my friend and I were in my boyfriend's basement talking about the paranormal and discussing our views and experiences in that regard. There was this bedroom directly across from where we were sitting, and neither of us liked the vibes coming from that empty room. Actually, that's what started our conversation about the paranormal. Well, after a few minutes, I felt something bump the back of the couch hard enough to make me bounce forward a little, and then I felt a hand on my shoulder. Maybe I was just imagining it, but my friend said she felt it too. That's when I saw something so horrific from the doorway of that room. I was absolutely certain I imagined it, and I wasn't going to say anything about it, but when she described the thing I thought I imagined, oh hell. At the bottom of the doorway, a little being that I can only say looked a little like the head goblin from the movie Legend, except without the huge nose, and had a scary face, wide grin full of sharp teeth and greasy-looking black ringlets of hair. It sprang up diagonally from near the bottom of that dark doorway. It looked right at me. Then it disappeared, the same way it had appeared. I couldn't help the gasp that escaped me, but as I said, I was going to keep it to myself, so neither of us questioned my sanity until my friend spoke up and said, "I saw it too." Now, I hadn't told her that I saw anything, but she went on to describe everything I just said, while I sat there, speechless and scared. It didn't take long after that to gather up our belongings and zip past that dark doorway and sprint up those stairs so fast, and I never went down there again. The thing wasn't tall at all. It was at the bottom left of the doorway, and it literally came up diagonally about a foot from the floor. And I only saw half of him, I think. I didn't see the bottom half. He didn't even touch the door frame, like to hoist himself up at that angle. He just popped up, grinned all wide, then popped back down the same way. His mouth was very wide, like it took up the whole bottom half of his face, and it was literally grinning from ear to ear. I told my boyfriend about it. He said he'd never experienced anything, but he did admit how weird it was that he would find large wolf spiders in the basement lined up dead against one of the walls on the other side of the stairs. I annoyed the crap out of him asking questions to make sure he wasn't lying about not knowing how they got there, but he really couldn't explain it. He did say that one room had an alcove dug farther into the wall that wasn't in the floor plans. I didn't like that room altogether, but knowing about that extra space really disturbs me. I grew up with paranormal stuff most of my life, but this is the one thing where I have no clue what it is. This happened like 25 years ago when I lived with 2 roommates. One night, me and the male roommate were watching TV, and the female roommate came out of their room and told us that she was going to take a shower. As soon as she went into the bathroom, a weird albino humanoid creature came out of their room and started to follow her. Then it stopped and looked at me and my male roommate and then ran back to the bedroom. Me and my male roommate looked at each other and ran after it, but when we got into the bedroom, there was nothing in there. We searched the whole house and found nothing. We asked our female roommate about it, but she never saw it. She was already in the bathroom. The only other thing that happened at that place was one night all 3 of us saw the wall of the dining room moving. The female roommate said it was shimmering, but my male roommate said it looked like it was breathing. I thought it looked like, you know when you see a heat wave coming up off the road? It was like that. I wonder if it was a portal of some sort. I was on a road trip about July 2014. We were driving through Ohio when my friend and I diverted from the route to relax at Hocking Hills State Park near Logan, Ohio. What I encountered there has stuck with me and disturbed me for years. Although I can kind of joke about it, I am certain that what I saw wasn't human. I was in the public shower in the same stall that my friend had just showered in without any incident when I caught something from the corner of my eye. When I looked down, there was a disturbing looking creature, very ugly and small, craning its neck beneath the stall in a very unnatural way so that it could glimpse at me showering. This creature was almost frog-like or troll-like in the face, with oddly placed patches of hair on its cheeks where normally a man's beard wouldn't grow. The way it slid its head under and looked up at me was bizarre and demonic. And when I looked down at it, I could see satisfaction or delight in this being's expression that I was frightened. I swear, in an instant I turned off that shower and put my clothes on while I was still soaking wet. All the while in my head I was thinking about what it was I saw and if I should confront it in the stall. Then I heard the shower creak on. This was almost like a clever way to dissuade me from confronting it, I think, almost trickster-like. Well, I ran out of that shower house and immediately told my friend to drive away because I'd just encountered a leprechaun or a troll in the bathroom. The way that creature moved and could crane its neck was not human. Heck, if it were just a crackhead or a weird guy peeping under the stall, I wouldn't have been nearly as disturbed. It was a true terror of fear I felt in my gut. One night, I was in my teens, I was about 17. I got up to go to the bathroom, and as I open my door, I see something. For context, my light was the only one to stay on in the house, Everywhere else was pitch black. So I'm in my doorway looking at this creature that my light is shining on. It's sitting on my father's workbench. It turns to me sideways, and I notice it has a huge head and big reflective black abyss eyes. Its grin is huge. It's like a flattish crescent smile, and the teeth are sharp with no gaps. It's squinting at me. I step back into my room. I close the door and I heave. I didn't even know that I was holding my breath. But after I breathe, because apparently I had held my breath for a good while, I got back into bed, and that's all I remember. I told my mum this story when I was older. She mentioned that I'd seen a tiny man outside my window as a toddler. I said, "Wait, what?" She said I would get ready for bed by making sure he was outside and not in the house. My mum said I told her he was a goblin. She put it down to my imagination. But as a kid, I'd always tell myself goblins were invisible in the light. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew. When I was 6 years old, I saw something similar to a goblin, like the one from Spider-Man. That's the closest thing I can compare it to. So I was at my friend's backyard, and he and I were sitting on a walled fence to his neighbour's place. This neighbour's house was empty. No one had lived there for quite some time. It was kind of ruined, but it still had windows. I remember we were just sitting there for ages, just talking, and I was staring in one of those windows when suddenly some goblin-like face appeared, and it had a very evilish looking smile, and it was laughing. I was absolutely petrified with fear. My adrenaline jumped through the roof, and I immediately jumped off the fence with no words to my friend and just sprinted back to my own house. When I came in, my mum and my grandma were asking what had happened. I was absolutely petrified. My heart was beating like crazy, and I just said that I saw something really strange. To this day, I get flashback memories from that day and what I saw, and it is stuck in my head. I don't know what it was, but it was something for sure. I know my mind didn't make this up. Never, ever in my life have I seen anything strange except for that. I know this might sound crazy, but when I was around 3 years old, around 2006 or 2007, my mum and I had just come home from my grandma's house after she got off work, and we arrived home at like 6:30 or 7 p.m. Now, I know that some say you can't remember anything from a young age and that my mum might just be influencing me to remember this, but I actually remember this very vividly. I read a similar story once and shared it with my mum, and it literally gave my mum and I goosebumps because of how similar it was to ours. Well, so here it goes. We walked into our house and I went to go play in my room while my mum started to cook dinner. I remember I was just playing in my room, then I stepped out of my room to start wandering around when I looked into my father's gaming room, and there I saw this goblin-like creature. He had pointy ears and a grin with these sharp teeth, and he must have stood about 6 or 7 feet. when I saw him, I ran to my mum in the kitchen and I started tugging on her to come with me. Well, she immediately followed after me and she saw him as well. But he moved into our hallway and he looked very confused or concerned, like he didn't know where he was at. When he looked at us, he looked surprised. He looked very inhuman, but he didn't instill fear in us. Instead, it was more of a calming presence. Then, after he saw us, he ran back towards the gaming room and just disappeared. My mum went to go check to see where it went, but he was nowhere to be found. Mind you, there were only 2 windows and they were blocked off by a desk, and they were closed because we'd been out. Many have told me that this was just my dad playing a prank on us, but he was never around, and he isn't nearly as tall as the goblin that we saw. We still talk about it to this day, me and my mum, and we tell the exact same story every time. My aunt is almost 80 years old now, and she had a strange encounter in the bathroom with something when she was a kid in rural Pennsylvania. The house they lived in was the first of 2 built by my grandfather in the area, and it was surrounded by thick woods. And there was another home about an acre in front of them that was closer to the main road. She was 8 years old when this happened. She woke up in the middle of the night because she had to pee. So she went down the hall and saw the light was on in the bathroom, and she heard a clinking sound. She waited a little bit for someone to come out, but no one did. So finally she knocked, and no one answered, but she still heard a little clinking noise. So she opened the door, and there was a little ugly troll-looking man about 2 foot tall, dressed in peasant-looking clothes, but he had buckled shoes and a hat, and he had a little hammer. She said he was hitting the hammer on the pipe. He looked at her very angrily and motioned with the hammer and said, "Go, get out, get out." So she ran back to her room, scared as hell. Sometime later, their neighbour was over and asked my grandmother why their bathroom light was always on at night. She didn't know what the lady was talking about, but my aunt said it was probably the little man. She told them about it, but they just laughed and didn't believe her. I've had a few strange things happen to me during the years. The first one I remember was the visit from 2 goblins. Now I know you're going to say, oh, you were only a kid, or you must have been semi-awake and still dreaming, but this has stayed with me for more than 50 years, and I can still see these creatures in my mind as clear as when it first happened. I was about 5 or 6 at the time, and we lived in a Victorian terraced house, what we call here in England a 2 up, 2 down, which is basically 2 bedrooms above and 2 downstairs rooms. The only addition we had was a single-story kitchen/wash house that was tacked onto the back, and the outside toilet or privy was out back of that. There must have been, and probably still are, many thousands just like it up and down the country. Not at all spooky from what I remember. Well, as we were both very young, my older sister by 5 years and we shared the back bedroom, with our parents having the front one. My bed was in the corner furthest from and parallel to the rear-facing window, with my sister's bed just the other side of our shared bedside table, and between that and the bedroom door. My habit was to sleep with my back to the wall so I could see the whole room pretty much in one view. Well, that just helps to set the scene. On the night in question, I awoke to see what I still vividly remember as an imp / goblin / gargoyle type figure clinging to the wall near the ceiling, near the chimney stack, and heading toward the diagonally far corner. As most kids would do, I pulled the bedclothes over my head and pretended to be asleep, whilst still unable to take my eyes off this thing through the tiny gap that I'd left. He, I call him he could have been no bigger than 10 inches tall, and he moved in a jerky manner, like skitter, stop, look around, repeat, moving maybe a few inches in one movement. And he seemed to have no difficulty supporting himself by clinging to the wallpaper with his claws. I remember thinking that it looked as if it were lit by moonlight from the window, but we had curtains that were always drawn and closed at night. Greyish with sharply defined detail, its skin was like one of those sphinx cats, although I never knew they even existed at the time. You know, like stretched over its bones, smooth but supple and slightly baggy at the same time. It had no wings that I could see, but it had big pointed ears, large eyebrows and eyes. Just to say, we didn't go anywhere much beyond the end of the street at that age, apart from to school and back, along streets that were just like ours, so my known world was very small indeed. I had very limited experience, and I couldn't have conjured it up from a memory. It's only been as I've got older that I've come to recognise the same things on church masonry and as modern garden ornaments. Well, as it got nearer to the corner and then around onto the window wall, I then noticed a second creature near the other side of the window from the first. This too was jerking its head around shiftily as if on lookout for anything that might be coming. Now, our windows were the old-fashioned sash-type ones, which were two-part and slid past each other in an up-down direction, with a rotary latch at the middle which stopped either half from sliding up or down. As the two things met up on either side of the top frame, just under the curtain rail, and the curtains were open, the second one pushed down on the top section of the window with its rear leg or foot and slid it down just a few inches, wide enough for them to climb out. With one last scan over their shoulders at just the room in general, they both climbed out and slid the window closed from the outside. They then both disappeared from view. I suppose they went up and over the guttering and onto the roof. I lay awake for a long time for fear that they would come back, but I must have dropped off back to sleep eventually. The next morning I debated whether to mention what had happened to my parents, but I chose to keep it to myself for fear of ridicule. I never thought to check the window catch, as I was way too small to reach that high on the window anyway, and was always warned about climbing on things and the dangers of falling off furniture. So I just got on with my kid's life, I guess, and pushed it to the back of my mind, chalking it up to a bad dream. For many, many years I kept this to myself, but a couple of years back I was visiting my sister and recounted my experience during mutual reminiscences of our early childhood home to finally unburden myself, I think, of that secret. And when I'd finished, she just said, "Oh yes, them," with the emphasis on them, as if she knew about them, but that they were something that shouldn't be talked about. She wouldn't go into any further detail or answer the questions that came into my head, and just waved it away with a sudden change of subject. Whether or not she had seen the same things that same night or had had her own experiences with them is still unclear. I certainly never saw them again after that night, and our parents moved us all to a newer home across the other side of the city soon after. What they were, or why they were in our room that night, I will never know. But they were sneaking around for some reason. Perhaps my awakening put paid to their intentions and forced them to make a hasty exit. I do hope so. I saw one, no more than 2 meters away from me. This one looked scared and shocked that I had discovered him. I believe I was even more scared than him, honestly. I was walking through a golf course at night. It was about midnight with my best friend when we suddenly saw something coming out from a bush to cross the golf cart road where we were coming from. Initially, I thought it was a skunk with its tail up because it looked pointy, and it was just the most logical explanation to pop into my mind. At first, it didn't notice us, but then when we came closer, we noticed it was a thing walking on 2 legs, about 30 centimeters tall. I asked my friend, "Is that a skunk?" Then the thing noticed us approaching and turned around with a facial expression of being caught and frightened. I even remember hearing him have a huge gasp. He looked over at us frozen, so we did the same as him. Me, my friend, and the goblin stared at each other, frozen for about 3 seconds. The only thing he moved were his human-like eyes. Then my friend started screaming, "What is that? Is that a child? Is that a baby?" Which was very shocking to see, like a 2-month-old baby walking so smoothly on a golf course at midnight. Then, because of my friend's screaming, it ran away fast and we lost it on the field. It didn't even cross our minds to chase the thing because, well, we were just so shocked. We went back to our houses, not discussing what the hell had just happened until the next day, because we were still scared and just couldn't believe what we just saw, since we were always skeptical of things like that. With this goblin, it looked like a tiny human adult face and a baby-sized body. He wore white pants that looked more like rags, really. No shirt, no shoes. He had an afro-type, cone-shaped hair. It was black-coloured and with a thick white stripe in the middle. I think that's why I thought it was a skunk tail at first. His facial expressions were very, very animated, and I was very surprised at how fast he could run. He moved his legs so freaking fast. I'm convinced that he was afraid of us because of our size compared to his. I suppose they only come out at night and in rural zones or open space areas to avoid human contact. I doubt they could be seen in the city, only in the wilderness. Well, that was 2 years ago now, and I still remember it very well. It disturbed me so much that it's now stuck in my head. I remember that night in great detail, and I think of it often. After that experience, I believe in everything, that everything could exist in this world, even mermaids or Bigfoot. I mean, who knows? Now it makes sense to me why so many people talk about seeing them. A lot of cultures talk about them, in tales and books, etc. The idea of these creatures has been around for centuries, and that's because people have seen them. Years ago, my sister and her fiancé got in a huge argument. My sister and her fiancé and we were all in the living room at the time it happened. Well, she got up to go into the restroom that was right next to us in the living room. She opened the door, upset still, and held it open for her dog. This dog had severe separation anxiety, and she always did that so that he could walk in there with her. He would always go with her everywhere, or he'd have a massive fit. Well, this time he just sat at the doorway and just stared into the restroom and refused to go in. She just brushed it off and went in by herself. Not but a few seconds later, she's screaming bloody murder and runs out of the restroom. She said she saw something out of the corner of her eye. When she turned to look, it was a small troll type thing, about 7 or 8 inches tall, on the sink counter. She cried so much because of how scared she got. And my sister is a major skeptic, so for her to say she saw this means she really saw it. I lived in a very haunted home as a child, and both my sister and I saw what I have been calling gnomes or goblins when retelling the events. They used to watch us while we slept, and they would peer into the room and giggle, whisper and quietly talk amongst themselves in a language we could not understand, a language that included clicking noises. Well, she and I never discussed seeing them at the time, but 10 years later, during a discussion of our supernatural experiences, my sister almost turned white when I started to describe my experiences with them. When I tried to mimic the noises they used to make, she almost broke into tears. She was so terrified. They usually came in a few at a time. They were all dressed uniquely. There seemed to be a leader, and I remember him the most. He had a large, long, bumpy nose and pointed ears. He had wrinkled and thick, textured skin on his face and deep-set, large eyes. His clothing was interesting and reminds me now of traditional German clothing. The most striking feature, though, was the hooved feet. He had human-type hands, but hooved feet. They never came close to us and remained at the doorframe and would poke their heads around the frame of the door. They seemed to be stopped from entering for some reason, We both saw them multiple times. I think people just automatically assume it's your imagination. I might have believed that as well if my sister hadn't also seen them. She's a very honest person and would not lie about something like this. And the expression of shock on her face when I first mentioned them was real. I think they became myth in human culture, but they actually do exist. My theory is that they are interdimensional beings. I do not believe they are malicious. I always sensed that they were curious and mischievous, although it was frightening since we didn't know what they were, but we were never threatened by them directly. My mum once told me about how, when I was an infant, she woke up one night to all these little creatures at the bottom of her bed, and she just knew that they were there for me, and they felt malevolent to her. It wasn't until recently she told me that there were multiple other times, though I only remember the one time when I was about 8, and I woke up with all the lights on and her clutching at me. I slept in her king-size bed pretty often since my dad was an over-the-road trucker. I've never seen anyone else with a similar experience, and all my friends have heard this story from when I was a baby. I've had brownies around a lot, and I've seen one myself. I was laying on my bed, wide awake, reading a book, and suddenly I see this thing just walk through, literally through my door. It was maybe 2 feet tall, and it was almost invisible. It walked in and immediately started looking around my room. It had its hand on a chair and was bending down, and it briefly turned to look at me. It did a sort of double take and looked me right in the eye, like it was surprised that I could see it. Then it just booked it out of my room like a bat out of hell. It hit the door running and it shook from the impact. I never saw it again. When I was a kid, my bedroom was at the end of our hallway. Our hallways had full-length mirrors, so you can see my room from the reflection on the other side of the hallway, which leads to the kitchen and living room. I clearly remember seeing a small, dark, dwarf or gremlin-like creature on my bedpost playing with the light bulb of my lamp. My childhood house had lots of weird things happen that I can't explain, and that's what got me interested in the paranormal. What I saw was maybe 3.5 or 4 feet tall. It had ears that were sticking out. They weren't completely straight out to the side, but they were angled, similar to a dog's ears, and very visible. Each ear was probably close to about half the size of their head vertically. The skin was really worn on its ears to the point that it almost looked like there were holes, but there weren't any. Just no cartilage, and skin on skin made it appear translucent in parts of its ears. It grunted, no words, but I got the impression that it may have been able to speak or knew that's how humans primarily communicated, and it was trying to mimic it. I only heard it grunting, so I can't think of a better way to describe it than just very deep. Its voice was deeper than you would think it was physically possible to go. One thing that strikes me from this collection of sightings is that goblins could be around us all the time. Perhaps when we get that feeling that something is off, a foreboding of something bad, our senses are piqued, but we don't know why. Could there be a goblin nearby? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to seeing what you think. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to get early access to my videos and help me grow the channel, please consider joining me as a channel member. Just click the join button below to check it out. Until next time, stay curious. Cheerio!